Hey guys, it's Courtney and I'm back with another video for Trinity stamps. Today I'll be using the stamp set Let Love Grow. This stamp set has this large image as well as some smaller images and quite a few sentiments that match these images really well. I'm going to be creating a background here. So I am starting off with a piece of Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock, and this is cut down to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And when I create a background with stamped images, I like to start right there in the center and then work my way out from there. I did create a mask and I'm using Eclipse masking paper for this. And I started just by cutting out one, I guess being a little lazy, but I ended up having to bring in another one. It wasn't possible to just use one for this particular background. Each time I'm stamping my image, I'm kind of twisting it around and turning it upside down just to make sure that they don't all exactly look the same. And I am going directly off the paper as well. I want it to make it look like one solid image in the end. We will be trimming this panel down once our coloring is done, so your images will go off the paper anyway, but I just find this easier to make sure that I have all of those little images equally spread out throughout the card. Once all of my little areas were filled in and I was happy with the placement that I had, we are going to Copic color this entire background. Now the coloring for this ended up taking me about 2.5 or 3 hours. I will not make you watch all of that. We'll kind of skip around and I'll just show you the color combinations that I used. For these little gems, I guess they are, I'm using my YG markers and I'm laying down my lightest color. Then I'll go in with my darkest color and just add some shading around each side. Blend that out with my mid-tone and then back to my lightest color. I find it easiest to start with one color family, like I'm coloring all these gems, and I'll color all of the gems throughout the entire panel, then move on to my next image. I won't show you all of that. I'm just showing you the color combinations here. Once I had all of my 3 colors down for these, I wasn't getting the contrast that I was looking for. So I ended up going in with a G marker as my darkest color rather than the YG, and then blended that out with the same mid-tone and same highlight color. I wanted these to kind of look shiny, and I just wasn't getting that from just the YG markers. So if you're not happy with your contrast, try adding a little bit of a darker color. I know darker colors can be a little scary, but it will make a huge difference in your coloring by adding that shadow color or that darker color. Once I was done with these little gems, I moved on to the rest of them all over the card panel, and we'll move on to this larger succulent that is right there in the center of this stamped image. And I'm going to be bringing in BG markers and G markers for this. So I'm starting with my lightest BG color, which is the BG 15, and just going from the base of the petal to about the middle. Then I'll take my lightest G marker, which is the G12, and go from the tip of the petal down towards the middle. Now I'll bring in my darkest color, which is the BG 18 on the base, blend that out with the BG 15, blend that out a little bit further with my G03, and then finally back to that G12. Now these colors are pretty similar, even though one's a blue-green and one's a regular green. So they do end up blending very well. The tip to making different color families blend well is the last number. If they're similar, they will blend. So in the middle there, I have the BG15 and the BG15 and the G03. Being that last number is pretty similar to one another, they will blend. I'm not worried about shadowing here where one petal lays over the other, because I got so much going on in this card, I really wasn't paying too much attention to that. Once all of those were colored, we will move on to this next succulent. And I wanted this to be kind of a muted purple. I actually Googled succulents to see what colors they are, and they're really pretty much any color you're looking for. I'm starting with my lightest color and filling in the entire area. Next, I'll move on to my BV17, which was initially going to be my darkest color, and then blending that out with my midtone. Once I started blending that out, I realized it just wasn't dark enough to get that contrast. So I brought in my BV08, which is just a little bit darker. My darkest areas are just going to be on the base of these little petals where they're kind of in the center of the succulent itself. Then I'll go back in with that same mid-tone color and blend those lines out just a little bit further, just leaving the tips of the petals for my highlight color. And once again, I went through the entire panel and colored all of these the same way. Next, we'll move on to the BG70s. So for this first succulent here, we're going to make this a little bit darker. And I'm going in with my lightest color, which is the BG72. Then my darkest color, which is the BG78. And again, just putting those darker areas where the petals are kind of gathered in the center. Blending that out with my BG75. And then finally back to that BG72. Once all of those were colored, I'm going to keep out those BG70 markers, except this time I'm going to bring in the BG70. And I'm going to skip the BG78. So I'm just kind of working my way down to make these a little bit lighter. The BG70 is super light. You can probably barely see it there on camera, but I am saturating the image by just going over the entire thing with my lightest color. This will allow it to blend a little bit easier. Next, for my darkest color is the BG75, blending that out with the BG72, and then finally going back to that BG70. And these actually do blend. I know it's a big difference between the 72 and the 70, but they actually do blend pretty well. Next, for the next succulents, I'm bringing in my YG90s, and I'm covering the entire image with my lightest color once again. The only shadow that I'm adding here is directly in the center where it kind of bunches up on itself. Blending that out with my mid-tone and then back to my lightest color. For these little flowers that kind of come off this succulent, and I don't even know if these are flowers, but that's what we're making them. I'm just using two colors here, and I'm doing my shading the same way. The darkest color right there in the center where it gathers up together, and then blending that out with my R43. For these little berries, I guess they are, again, not 100% sure what these are. I love flowers. I love succulents. I know nothing about them. But I am coloring these in. There's little itty bitty tiny ones that I'm just basically tapping my marker down just a little bit to fill in those little tiny ones. And for the larger ones, I am going in and adding that highlight color just to give the larger ones just a little bit of dimension. And I guess the little stem maybe that comes off of that, I am just going in with my R43 and just coloring that in solid. Again, not worried about getting too much dimension there. Now you can see off to the side on some of the edges of my card panel, there's some images that I did not color, primarily because I didn't know what they were. So I'm just going to ignore those because we're going to be trimming down this panel anyway. So I did go ahead and take 1/4 of an inch off each side, and I just tried to take the sides that I didn't necessarily finish that coloring for. Any areas that there was just maybe a little bit showing that I didn't color, I'm just taking my YG93 and going through it. You're not even going to notice the difference. Next, I layered this down on a piece of black cardstock. For the sentiment, I just used a scrap piece of that same black cardstock that we used for the mat of that panel. And I'll be stamping this with my Versamark ink and white heat embossing it. I do go over my black cardstock with an anti-static tool, especially on darker cardstock, especially black. Any white embossing powder, any single little piece of white embossing powder will show up. So you want to make sure that you definitely use an anti-static tool before you do your embossing. I did go ahead and heat set that and then cut that into a strip. Instead of just doing a regular strip sentiment here, I usually take my scissors. I don't always fishtail the ends, but sometimes I'll just cut one end at an angle just to give it a little bit of interest. I went ahead and put that entire panel onto a white card panel here, and this is an A2 size card base with that same Tombow Mono multi glue. I'll take a piece of Scotch foam tape just for the back of that sentiment strip. And I actually cut the sentiment almost the same size as the Scotch foam tape, so that worked out well. Before I adhered that down, I did take my white gel pen just to add a little bit of reflection. And I did this randomly. I chose random petals from this larger succulent here. And I did add a reflection right there in the center of all these little gems. They weren't actually that noticeable because the YG markers are pretty light. Typically, the white gel pen is only going to show up when your coloring is fairly dark. But for the larger succulents there that I kind of just added a highlight to random petals, I had no rhyme or reason for this. I wasn't considering a light source or anything like that. I just wanted to give a little bit of added interest. I also took a Nuvo sparkle pen to go over those little gems. Now, before you add your sparkle pen, if you used a white gel pen, you want to make sure that that's completely dry first because it'll just spread that white ink around. Once all my sparkle was on there, I did go ahead and adhere that sentiment strip right down in the center towards the top. And that is it for today's card. Thank you guys so much for stopping by, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.